A bustling downtown restaurant on a Friday evening, where the warm glow of pendant lights illuminates tables filled with cheerful diners. The gentle clinking of silverware and murmur of conversations create that perfect ambience we all love. At one particular table, a well-dressed black man in his 30s sits alone, peacefully scrolling through his phone while waiting for his order. He's a successful architect who just closed a major deal and decided to treat himself to dinner at this upscale establishment. The evening takes an unexpected turn when a white woman in her mid-40s, wearing a designer blazer and carrying an air of entitlement, approaches his table. Without even a hint of hesitation, she extends her hand, expecting him to hand over what she assumes is the menu he's finished with. The thing is, he hasn't even been served yet. The moment hangs thick in the air as other diners begin to notice the interaction. What happens next is something that has social media buzzing and people everywhere talking about assumptions, grace, and the power of choosing how we respond to uncomfortable situations. You see, this accomplished architect had two choices. He could react with justified anger at being mistaken for waitstaff, or he could handle it in a way that would leave an indelible mark on everyone present, especially the woman who made such a careless assumption. The restaurant falls silent as heads turn toward their table. The woman's face begins to flush as she slowly realizes her mistake, but it's his response, so unexpected, so masterful, that transforms this potentially volatile situation into something entirely different. Instead of meeting prejudice with anger, he chooses a path that no one, least of all the woman, saw coming. The way he handles the next 30 seconds doesn't just change the woman's entire perspective. It sends ripples through the restaurant and eventually across social media, where the story goes viral. His response becomes a masterclass in dealing with bias and turning an awkward confrontation into a moment of genuine human connection. Other diners who witnessed the scene later shared how this brief interaction made them examine their own hidden biases. The real power of this story lies not just in what happened, but in how it reflects larger truths about our society and our ability to bridge divides through understanding and compassion. But here's where things get really interesting. Just when the woman thinks the interaction is over and she can retreat in shame, something unexpected happens. The architect does something so profound, so impactful, that it doesn't just leave her regretful. It completely transforms her worldview. And the best part, every single person in that restaurant becomes part of this incredible moment. This isn't just another viral story about a racial misunderstanding. It's about what happens when we choose to respond to ignorance with wisdom, when we decide to turn an embarrassing mistake into an opportunity for growth. The security cameras caught everything, but what they captured was more than just an interaction. They recorded a moment that would soon inspire millions. As more witnesses start sharing what they saw on social media, the story takes on a life of its own. But what really happened next? How did this architect's response change not just one person's perspective, but spark a conversation that would reach far beyond those restaurant walls? And most importantly, what can we all learn from this remarkable moment about handling prejudice, choosing our reactions, and the power of human connection? Stay tuned, because this story isn't just about what happened that evening. It's about how one person's response to prejudice can create a ripple effect of positive change. And trust me, you won't believe how this ends. Let's rewind just a bit to understand why this moment became so powerful. You see, our architect had just wrapped up presenting designs for a multi-million-dollar sustainable building project. After hours of meetings, he chose this restaurant, one of the city's finest, to celebrate quietly by himself. The irony? He'd actually helped design the restaurant's modern interior 2 years earlier. As he sat there, he was typing out a heartfelt message to his mom, telling her about his successful presentation. His father had passed away just 6 months ago, and sharing these victories with his mother had become their new way of keeping his memory alive. His dad had always taught him that true strength lies not in reacting, but in responding with purpose. The woman who approached his table had actually been having a rough day herself. As a regional manager for a retail chain, she just finished dealing with a series of challenging meetings. She was distracted, tired, and operating on autopilot when she made that thoughtless assumption. But what she didn't know was that her actions were about to become a turning point not just for her, but for everyone watching. When she extended her hand for what she thought was the menu, our architect looked up and saw something familiar in her expression. The same kind of stress and exhaustion he'd seen in his colleagues' faces earlier that day. Instead of immediately correcting her mistake, he paused for a brief moment, remembering his father's words about choosing responses over reactions. The other diners had already started pulling out their phones, expecting yet another viral moment of confrontation. A young couple at the next table even whispered, "Here we go again." But they were all about to witness something entirely different. The architect's response would soon show them that sometimes the most powerful statements aren't made with words at all. What makes this story even more remarkable is that among the diners was a local high school teacher who had just finished leading a workshop on unconscious bias that very afternoon. She watched the scene unfold with particular interest, never expecting to see such a perfect real-world example of what she'd been teaching just hours before. The tension in the restaurant was palpable. You could hear conversations dying down as people turned to watch. A server carrying a tray of drinks even stopped mid-stride, sensing the weight of the moment. The woman's hand remained extended, her confident expression slowly morphing into uncertainty as the seconds ticked by. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The architect slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that would completely change the dynamic of the situation. The woman's eyes widened as she realized what he was holding, and the watching crowd let out a collective gasp. The security footage, which would later go viral, shows the exact moment when everything shifted. The architect's calm demeanor, the woman's changing expression, and the reaction of the onlookers all paint a picture of a moment that transcends the usual narrative of these encounters. What happened next would not only challenge everyone's expectations, but would also spark a conversation about how we handle these moments of unconscious bias. The architect's next words and actions would prove that sometimes the most powerful teaching moments come not from confrontation, but from a place of understanding and wisdom. The story was about to take another surprising turn, one that would leave not just the woman, but every single person in that restaurant, questioning their own assumptions and biases. As the architect prepared to respond, no one could have predicted how his next actions would transform an awkward mistake into a moment of profound learning. From his pocket, the architect pulled out a business card, but not just any business card. It was a custom-designed card featuring a minimalist sketch of the very restaurant they were sitting in. As he held it up, the soft lighting caught the metallic embossing of his architectural firm's logo. The woman's extended hand began to tremble slightly as realization started dawning on her face. "I believe," he said with a gentle smile, "you might be interested in this instead of a menu." His voice carried no hint of anger or sarcasm, just a calm assurance that commanded attention from everyone within earshot. The woman's face flushed deeper red as she noticed his perfectly tailored suit and the tablet beside him displaying detailed building blueprints. The high school teacher, still watching intently, had unconsciously pulled out her notebook, recognizing that she was witnessing something her students needed to hear about. The young couple who had expected drama were now leaning forward, their phones forgotten in their hands, completely absorbed in the unfolding scene. The architect slowly stood up, his height and presence adding another layer of impact to the moment. But instead of making the woman feel smaller, his body language remained open and welcoming. He gestured to the empty chair across from him, an invitation that left the entire restaurant holding their breath. Would she run away in embarrassment? Would she accept? The next few seconds seemed to stretch into minutes. A server, who had been watching everything unfold, started moving toward their table with a fresh set of menus. The architect raised his hand slightly, signaling them to wait. He had something more important to share first. The woman stood frozen, her eyes moving between the business card, the architect's face, and the chair he'd offered. What happened in the next few moments would end up being shared millions of times across social media platforms. But what made this interaction truly special wasn't just what the architect said or did. It was how he transformed an uncomfortable moment into something that would impact everyone present in ways they never expected. The woman's designer blazer suddenly felt too tight as she clutched her purse closer, visibly struggling with how to respond. The architect remained standing, patient and composed, as if he had all the time in the world. Then he reached into his pocket one more time, pulling out something else that made several onlookers gasp audibly. The security camera footage shows the exact second when everything changed. The woman's expression shifted from embarrassment to shock, then to something else entirely, something that would soon have people across the internet debating about human nature, forgiveness, and the power of choosing kindness over confrontation. Just before the architect revealed what was in his hand, he spoke again, his words carrying clearly across the now silent restaurant. What he said next would not only change how the woman saw him, but would challenge everyone present to reconsider their own prejudices and assumptions. The tension in the room reached its peak as he prepared to show what he was holding. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how this moment would unfold. Little did they know, the architect's next action would create a ripple effect that would extend far beyond those restaurant walls, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways no one could have anticipated. In his hand, the architect held a photograph, worn around the edges and clearly cherished. It showed a younger version of himself, dressed in a waiter's uniform, standing proudly in front of a small diner. 10 years ago, he began, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to embrace the entire restaurant. This was me, working my way through architecture school, learning about human nature one table at a time. The woman's eyes widened as she looked at the photo, her hand unconsciously moving to cover her mouth. But before she could respond, the architect revealed something that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. And the woman who owned that diner, he continued, who gave me a chance when nobody else would, who worked around my class schedule, and who taught me that every interaction is an opportunity to show grace. She looked exactly like you. The restaurant, already silent, seemed to grow even quieter. The young couple who had been recording earlier slowly lowered their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something far more meaningful than a viral moment. The high school teacher had tears in her eyes, her notebook forgotten on her table. But here's where the story takes another unexpected turn. As the woman finally began to find her voice, ready to apologize, someone else stood up from across the restaurant. An elderly man, who had been dining alone in the corner, made his way to their table with slow, deliberate steps. In his trembling hands, he held something that would add yet another layer to this already powerful moment. The architect's composed expression flickered for just a second as he recognized what the elderly man was holding. A magazine article from 3 years ago. The headline read, "From Server to Skyline, the architect transforming our city." But it wasn't the article that caught everyone's attention. It was the elderly man's connection to both the architect and the woman that was about to be revealed. The security footage shows the exact moment when the elderly man reached their table, his presence creating a triangle of connected stories that nobody could have anticipated. The woman, still standing with the architect's business card in her hand, suddenly recognized the elderly man, and her face transformed from embarrassment to astonishment. What happened next would elevate the story from a simple lesson about prejudice to something far more profound. The elderly man's revelation would connect all three of them in a way that seemed almost too perfect to be real, yet the security cameras captured every incredible moment. The architect's photo of his time as a waiter began to tremble slightly in his hand as he realized who the elderly man was. The woman, now looking between both men, suddenly reached for her own phone, her hands shaking as she pulled up a photo that would complete this extraordinary circle of connections. The high school teacher, still watching intently, whispered to her neighboring table, "This is beyond anything I could teach in a classroom." She was right. What was unfolding before them wasn't just a lesson in handling prejudice. It was becoming a masterclass in how past, present, and future can collide in one perfect moment of human connection. Just as the woman was about to share her photo, the elderly man placed his hand on the architect's shoulder and said something that made the entire restaurant gasp. The words he spoke next would reveal a connection so unexpected, so perfectly timed, that it would leave everyone questioning whether some things in life are more than just coincidence. The elderly man's voice quivered with emotion as he spoke. "I was there," he said, "the day you drew your first building design." He turned to face the woman. It was on the back of a menu at Sarah's diner, your mother's diner. The woman's legs weakened, and she finally sank into the chair the architect had offered earlier, her eyes filling with tears. "My mother," she whispered, pulling up the photo on her phone. She always talked about a young server who would sketch buildings during his breaks. She passed away last year, but she kept every single one of those sketches. The architect's composed demeanor cracked slightly as he looked at the photo on her phone. It was his younger self, sitting at the diner counter, sketching alongside an older woman who was beaming with pride. The elderly man, it turned out, was a retired construction foreman who had been a regular at Sarah's diner. He had been the first person to take the architect's drawings seriously, even helping him secure his first internship. "When I saw you both here tonight," he explained, his voice growing stronger, "I knew it wasn't just coincidence." Sarah would have loved this moment. The architect gently placed his original sketch, the one he'd pulled from his pocket earlier, on the table. It was a design for Sarah's diner, reimagined as a modern restaurant, while keeping its heart and soul intact. "I've been trying to find the right time," he said softly, "to share this with Sarah's family. This restaurant we're sitting in, it's just the beginning. I want to honor her legacy." The woman's hands trembled as she touched the sketch. "Mom always said her diner would change lives," she managed through her tears. "She believed in treating everyone who walked through those doors like family." The architect smiled, remembering. "She used to say, sometimes people just need a menu, and sometimes they need a moment of kindness. Give them both." The young couple who had been recording earlier stood up and began to applaud. Like a wave, the entire restaurant joined in, not just for the beautiful connection they'd witnessed, but for the reminder that every interaction carries the potential for profound impact. But the story wasn't quite over. The woman reached into her blazer and pulled out something that brought everything full circle, an old, folded paper that her mother had carried in her purse until her last day. It was the architect's very first sketch, along with a note that read, "Someday, this young man will build not just buildings, but bridges between people." The security camera footage, which would later touch millions, shows the three of them, the architect, the woman, and the elderly man, sharing a moment of connection that transcended all assumptions and prejudices. But it's what happened next that truly captured hearts across the internet. The architect took out his phone and pulled up images of his next project, a community center being built on the site of the old diner. The design incorporated elements from his original sketches, Sarah's vision of bringing people together, and a special dedication plaque that would ensure her legacy lived on. As the woman looked at the designs, she reached into her bag one final time and revealed something that left even the architect speechless. It was a document that proved that sometimes the biggest moments in life come disguised as mistakes. But that revelation, well, that's a story for another day. The evening ended not with regret or embarrassment, but with a powerful reminder that sometimes our biggest mistakes can lead us to our most meaningful connections. As one viral comment later put it, they didn't just bridge a divide that night, they built a foundation for something much bigger. The document the woman held was the deed to the land where Sarah's diner once stood, the very same plot where the architect's community center was planned. As fate would have it, she had been struggling with how to honor her mother's legacy, and now the answer sat right in front of her. "Mom always said everything happens for a reason," she smiled through her tears, even mistaking a brilliant architect for a waiter. The next day, local news crews gathered as the woman and the architect signed papers making them partners in the community center project. The elderly foreman stood beside them, beaming like a proud father. The center would now include not just community spaces, but also a training program for aspiring architects and a small diner, named Sarah's, where students could work while pursuing their dreams. The security footage from that night went viral, but not for the reasons anyone might have expected. Instead of capturing a moment of conflict, it showed how a simple mistake could unfold into something beautiful. People shared stories in the comments about their own Sarahs, those special someone who believed in them when nobody else would. The high school teacher who witnessed everything incorporated the story into her curriculum, teaching her students that growth often comes from our most uncomfortable moments. Her students started a project called The Sarah Effect, documenting small acts of kindness that created bigger ripples of change in their community. 3 months later, during the community center's groundbreaking ceremony, the woman stood at the podium, her mother's old diner apron folded neatly beside her. My mother used to say that a menu is just paper, she began, but kindness is the real sustenance we serve. The architect stood nearby, holding the same sketch he'd drawn on the back of that menu all those years ago. The elderly foreman, now an honorary board member of the center, helped plant the first tree in what would become Sarah's garden, a space where future architects could sketch their dreams just like the young server once did. The tree was surrounded by benches made from the original diner's booths, preserved and repurposed to continue holding stories and dreams. But perhaps the most touching part of this story's end was what happened to that business card, the one the architect handed the woman that night. She had it framed alongside the original menu sketch, and they now hang in the entrance of the new Sarah's Diner within the community center. Below them, a simple plaque reads, "Sometimes mistakes serve the best dishes." The young couple who recorded the original interaction were invited to be the first customers when the diner opened. They ordered coffee and spent hours sharing their own dreams with the new generation of server students, continuing the cycle of encouragement that Sarah had started so many years ago. The video of that night has become more than just another viral moment. It's a reminder that grace can transform regret into opportunity. As one commenter beautifully put it, "In a world quick to capture conflict, this shows us how to capture hearts instead." Today, if you visit the community center, you'll notice something special. Every table has a small card alongside its menu reading, "Everyone who sits here has a story. Every mistake is an opportunity." And sometimes, the most beautiful designs come from unexpected moments. And if you look carefully, you might just spot an aspiring architect sketching their dreams on a napkin, while someone watches with the same pride Sarah once showed. As for the architect and the woman, they've become close friends, often sharing lunch at the diner, laughing about how a simple misunderstanding led to something so meaningful. And Sarah's legacy lives on, not just in the building's design or the diner's name, but in every moment someone chooses understanding over assumption and kindness over confrontation.